Good afternoon to our audience. I am Michelle Kidnell-Gilbert, the chair of the Archaeology Committee of the National Arts Club. And I'd like to welcome everyone here. For those in the audience who are unfamiliar with the Arts Club, founded in 1898, we're a 501c3 nonprofit based in Gramercy Park with a mission to stimulate, foster, and promote interest in the arts. Annually, the club offers approximately 150 programs to the public, including exhibitions, lectures, readings, theatrical, and musical performances. It came up earlier when we were talking, and for those who don't know, if you're not a club member, the programs are offered free to the public. So please do take a schedule from the Arts Club, be on the list for the Archaeology Committee, and you'll be invited to our events as well. For more information about the Arts Club, visit us at nacnyc.org or find us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. On behalf of President Tara Cortez, the Board of Governors, and the Archaeology Committee, I am particularly delighted that Professor Antonis Kotsonas discusses the Archaic Gap of Crete and the new archaeological discoveries at Lyktos. Today's event is presented in collaboration with the Archaeological Institute of America's New York Society, whose president fortuitously is our speaker. Accordingly, I request all AIA members, which includes myself, kindly to stand. Would you all stand? AIA members? Thank you. Dr. Antonis Kotsonas is Associate Professor at NYU's Institute for the Study of the Ancient World. His undergraduate studies at the University of Crete was soon followed by a master's degree from the University of Cambridge. And I have a question. Did you ever study with Paul Cartledge?
I did.
You did? Oh, he must have been an astounding treat. And our last online program was with Paul, and it's on the club website, as is another lecture that he gave for us about love and Sparta. And Antonis received his doctorate from the University of Edinburgh, author of 4 books and numerous awards, as well as some related to ancient Greece and the Mediterranean. He focuses primarily on the early Iron Age and the Archaic period, as well as directs the Lyktos Archaeological project in Crete, the subject of this lecture. I wish next to provide some background from previous talks. The rich Minoan Bronze Age civilization on Crete, in particular that which centered around Knossos and the port of Komos, have been explored in numerous talks. The volcanic eruption on nearby Thera and invading Mycenaean warriors devastated many palatial sites, which were subsequently rebuilt. Although the specific date of the Trojan War has yet to be determined, Homer relates Cretan participation on the Greek or Achaean side. Excuse me. The invasion of the Sea Peoples, venturing into Egypt and raiding Canaan, and they were called the Palisettes, is also something to be considered. Regarding today's subject, Lyktos, my favorite quasi-fact, is that some consider it to be the birthplace of Zeus, child of Kronos, leader of the Titans, and mother goddess Rhea. What was very interesting to me is that a number of other sites are connected with the birth of Zeus. And today at lunch, I learned that the name of our wonderful site and the subject may have also referred to another place site in Crete. I did not know that. So I think that certainly when a number of areas are connected with Zeus, this may be one of the reasons for it. However, today's presentation reflects a later cultural period than I discussed and the enumerated events, which nonetheless I want you to keep in context when you're hearing the lecture. Kindly join with the Archaeology Committee in welcoming our eminent speaker. Antonis, if you will.
Thank you, Michelle, for this very kind introduction, and many thanks also to the two co-sponsoring institutions, the National Arts Club and the Archaeological Society at Athens, for doing me the honor of inviting me to lecture today. I'm also thankful to the Archaeology Committee of the National Arts Club and its kind staff for doing everything they can to make this lecture successful. Thank you. In my capacity as president of the New York Society of the Archaeological Institute of America, I always make a pledge for people to consider becoming members of our society, and also to follow our activity on social media and online in general. I have one important piece of news to announce, and this regards the recipient of our scholarship for summer fieldwork. On an annual basis, we give up to 7 scholarships to students, undergraduates and beginning graduate students from around New York City to get involved with archaeology. And one of these people is Julian Keir from Barnard College, who also took a follow-up fellowship that we offer for summer fieldwork. And with this support from the society, she will be participating in the excavation of Barnard College at New Mexico, and also she will have an internship at the local museum. We are always proud to support students who conduct archaeology around the world or are passionate about archaeology, because we believe that's the future of the field we practice and the field we love. On this note, and I transition to the lecture itself. From its beginning in the 19th century, classical archaeology was dominated by research agenda, which was centered on ancient literature, and eventually on an art historical approach, which was focused on the figural arts of Greece and Rome. Both paradigms were fixated with the capital cities of Athens and Rome and the periods of their heyday, which was the 5th and 4th centuries BCE for Greece, for Athens, and for Rome, it was the imperial period from Augustus onwards. These paradigms marginalized a wide range of periods and regions of Mediterranean antiquity for too long. It was a condition which was challenged in the last half century with the development, the slow development of a different archaeological paradigm. This paradigm acknowledges the text-based and art historical legacy of the field, but is not constrained by it in developing different research questions and theoretical and methodological perspectives to Mediterranean antiquity. Today, I evaluate the limitations posed by traditional approaches to ancient Greece and also the potential of current archaeological perspectives through a case study centered on the island of Crete in the Archaic period, which roughly corresponds with the 6th century BCE. For a long time, the Archaic period of Greece was seen as a time of major socio-political and cultural developments. And accordingly, it attracted a lot of attention in the literature. This is just a small sample of monographs. To text-based scholars, philologists, or historians, this was the time of great lawgivers and tyrants, and also of the earliest public inscriptions issued in Greece and the Western world. To art historians, this was the time of the first monumental sculpture of men and women, or kouroi and kore, the earliest monumental temples built in stone entirely, and also of the black figure and red figure techniques of vase painting, and of other developments. Archaic Crete presents very little, or if any, evidence for these wide-ranging developments, at least in the eyes to many scholars and until recently. And here you have a map of the island with major sites, and I outline the location of Lyktos, which is important for my lecture. The island, ancient Crete, has long been taken to represent what is known as Cretan exceptionalism, which encompasses and is characterized by the lack of colonnaded temples, private inscriptions, and interest in Homer, the lack of colonnaded temples, the rarity of archaic sculpture and figural art, in addition to a presumed lack of private inscriptions and interest in Homer and in the culture of the symposium, the Greek drinking party. Additionally, the island's history of the early to mid-first millennium BCE receives scarce attention in ancient literature, and there are no known tyrants or political leaders, and any Cretan lawgivers known to us are semi-mythical figures. Accordingly, Crete was quickly considered marginal to classicists of the 19th and early 20th century. To the great philologist and epigrapher Ulrich von Wilamowitz, Crete was an isolated island occupied by semi-barbarous people and was discovered only in the 4th century by scholars in Athens. This is the time when Plato and Aristotle reflect on the Cretan constitution. This was how classical archaeology began. But more recent scholarship refrains, of course, from using this type of characterizations. However, there are major textbooks of Greek history which present maps like this. Notice something is missing. This is Crete, basically. From the end of the 19th century, the discoveries of the prehistoric Minoan palaces of Crete at Knossos and elsewhere on the island established that the place had a glorious prehistory, especially in the early to mid-second millennium. The Minoan past overshadowed the later periods of the island's history, and here you see two banners from the major archaeological museum of Heraklion, one focused on prehistory and the indigenous Minoans, the other focused on the historical period and basically presenting it as a period of successive conquest by the Dorians and the Romans. Already in the late 19th century, however, it became clear that major artwork was not exclusive to the Minoan period and the second millennium. Indeed, from the 9th century BCE, the material culture of Crete was shown to be particularly rich and diverse, with copious imports and imitations of artifacts from different parts of the Eastern Mediterranean, probably due to Phoenician agency. This tradition culminated in the 7th century BCE with the development in Crete of some of the earliest Greek monumental sculpture, which is called Daedalic, after the legendary craftsman Daedalus, who was said to have worked in Crete. Traditional accounts take this material culture of the 9th to 7th centuries to nearly disappear at 600 BCE, and the following 6th century of Crete to be really invisible archaeologically, with the sole inscription of public, the sole exception of public inscriptions written on stone, which are amply attested on the central part of the island. The invisibility of archaic Cretan art, but also of settlement, sanctuary, and burial sites, was eventually labeled the Archaic Gap. This gap has puzzled scholars for over a century. The problem was first conceptualized by the Australian scholar Tom Dunbabin. In 1937, Dunbabin decided to address this problem by excavating a field located close to the Knossos Palace, hoping on some tangential evidence that this will yield archaic finds, which were missing from Knossos despite the extensive excavations carried out in previous decades. Dunbabin's so-called archaic dig did not fulfill the expectation. And although he remained interested and invested in the problem, he died prematurely, and therefore this did not continue. The problems of archaic Crete received more visible discussion at the time of World War II. Just before the war, John Pendlebury spent some time reflecting on the problem, but he was also one of the people that died prematurely, actually executed by the Nazis during the war. The other scholar, the French Pierre de Marne, argued that the problem was of singular importance for Greek archaeologists. And he set a trend for proposing interesting historical explanations which encompassed that the problem, different interpretations, including that the problem stemmed from socio-political crisis, demographic and artistic decline, economic stagnation, and cultural isolation. And he and those who followed him sought to anchor these problems in the bits and pieces of ancient literature. This trend culminated in the 1990s, when the problem attracted the attention of major scholars, especially in the UK and the US, including Nicholas Coldstream, Sarah Morris, and Ian Morris, who reflected on the significance of the archaic gap in increasingly nuanced terms. For example, the near disappearance of Cretan settlements in the Archaic period was first associated with the reference of the ancient historian Herodotus to a drought which struck the nearby island of Thera and led her eventually to colonize Cyrene in North Africa. This drought was taken to have had an impact on Crete. The artistic decline was associated with literary reference to the departure of the sons and pupils of the legendary craftsman Daedalus from Crete, or it was taken to reflect the island's conservative socio-political regime, which was deduced from archaic inscriptions. This regime, people thought, would have little interest in connections with the Near East, which were anyway disrupted, people thought, by the besieging of the Phoenician city of Tyre by the Babylonian armies. Centered on ancient literature and art, the text-based and art historical approaches of the 20th century were increasingly considered unsatisfactory, and from the turn of the millennium, a shift towards more archaeological approaches can be traced. In 2000, Bryce Erickson completed his PhD, which eventually would lead to this book, which was centered on the style and chronology of the unimpressive and not particularly diagnostic pottery from Archaic and Classical Crete. It was hard. And in 2002, I published my very first article, which was on this topic, and argued that the disruptions in the archaeological record of Crete in the end of the 7th century were related to the socio-political developments and especially the rise of the city-state on the island. It was a happy coincidence that in the same year, Donald Haggis, an American scholar from the American School of Classical Studies at Athens, started excavating at Azoria, a settlement site in East Crete, which largely dates to the 6th century. By excavating intensively and extensively, in a remarkable fashion, Haggis established that Azoria emerged in the late 7th century when several sites in its immediate vicinity were abandoned and the population coalesced on the hilltop of Azoria. At the time, the site was radically rebuilt in a planned way within a single phase. Megalithic, roughly concentric terrace walls were erected to physically support the hillsides and notionally tie the community together. The labor and resources invested in creating domestic and communal spaces at the site increased drastically, and new kinds of formal architecture designed as forky for supra-household interaction were introduced at the time. Azoria flourished until its destruction in the early 5th century and remained largely unaffected by later activity, so hence the good state of preservation of the architecture. Notwithstanding the significance of the work at Azoria, the appreciation of its broader contribution to the archaeology of Greece is colored by uncertainties over the identity and ancient name of the site and also its political status. Namely, we do not really know if this was an independent political community, a polis, Greek polis. In any case, Azoria established that extensive archaic sites are there to be discovered on Crete. It also lent support to the idea that the Cretan Archaic Gap is a product not only of the visibility of the archaeological record, but also of the problematic history of research. This is an important lesson for Greek and Mediterranean history and archaeology, which is why the relevant discussion has occupied several pages in recent textbooks on Greek history and archaeology. These developments I've been sketching have inspired my own problem-oriented fieldwork at the site of Lyktos, which started 5 years ago, and is aimed at both bridging the Archaic Gap and also at challenging these various pillars of the alleged Cretan exceptionalism. And I will show how we challenge some of them in a minute. Lyktos was much bigger in size and much more long-lived than Azoria. Indeed, it was one of the most powerful and extensive cities of Greek and Roman Crete, and an independent community from the Archaic period onward, as we can judge from its issuing of laws and legal degrees, coins, and more. Lyktos is located on the hinterland of central Crete. It is centered on an acropolis which rises over 600 meters above sea level, and east of the site lies the rocky curtain of the Rasithi Mountains, which rise over 1,000 meters above sea level, while west of Lyktos is the extensive plain of the Pediada. In the plain, only 7 kilometers west of Lyktos, you can make out the runway of a military airport, which is now being transformed into the new international airport of Crete, with a carrying capacity of 10 million passengers per year. So if you come to Crete in the next few years, you will be landing there and you'll be close to Lyktos, so consider visiting us. The area, the archaeology of the area has hit international headlines because of the discovery of a Minoan prehistoric monument at the site of Papura, which is very unique from Greece. And this site was considered one of the world's top 10 discoveries for 2025 by the Archaeological Institute of America. Back to Lyktos, the site is celebrated by Homer. It is identified as the birthplace of god Zeus by the early Greek poet Hesiod, and is considered as the cradle of the Spartan constitution by no other than Aristotle. The site, because of this literary tradition, attracted antiquarians already from the time of the Renaissance. At around 1900, many famous names of Greek archaeology, international scholars of amazing standing, expressed an aspiration to excavate the site. And this includes this man, Arthur Evans, who became famous for excavating Knossos. Lyktos was number 2 on his list. However, none of these people were successful in excavating Lyktos, largely because of war and other major political developments. Indeed, little excavation was conducted at the site for much of the 20th century, and although people tried to dig it, and the rather sad trail of abortive plans of different people for excavating the site resurfaced in 2020, when my collaborators and I applied for a permit, received the permit from the Greek Ministry of Culture, and then were stuck with the COVID pandemic, as you all know. If there was even a curse about it, we broke it in 2021 when our fieldwork began. The lack of earlier systematic excavations at the site has had an effect on its visibility to scholars and to the wider audiences. However, by a funny coincidence, Lyktos emerged as a great brand name, applied on anything, from feta to gyro, to the fabulous olive oil produced at the site, to summer resorts, and even to investment firms. I'm amused by this panorama, but I'm more interested in the antiquity of the site, to the study of which I think our fieldwork has contributed considerably. The excavations at Lyktos are held under the auspices of the prestigious Archaeological Society at Athens and have targeted 4 areas of the ancient site. 3 on the Acropolis, as you can see, and 1 further out. Sector C, the red color on the Acropolis, is where my co-director Vasilikis Ifiakaki is excavating a Byzantine basilica. In Sector B, in yellow, my other co-director Angelos Chaniotis is exploring a Roman assembly hall. I chose to focus on the other 2 areas, the blue and the brown one, because they have yielded some preliminary evidence for the Archaic period, and I was interested in testing my hypothesis that the Cretan Archaic Gap was largely shaped by methodological problems in the design and practice of archaeological fieldwork. I chose this sector because based on older and small rescue excavations that established that they held promise and And this is the site on the Acropolis. You get a picture of it. It lies on the steep north slope. This is Sector A. This area had yielded, before we start excavating, it had yielded 2 pieces of archaic legal inscriptions. Also a cross-shaped trial trench conducted there half a century before we started had revealed part of a monumental wall together with a pottery of archaic and classical date, which was taken to indicate that there was a monumental building of this time, and it was filled with fine ware pottery and animal bone from feasting activities. This raised for me the question of whether the area held one of these structures we called an andrion, which is the Greek term for men's club. And we have a long description in ancient literature which tells us what was happening in the andrion. And I'll summarize some highlights so that you don't have to read all these texts. This is the place where the free citizens of Cretan cities, and especially the city of Lyktos, would come together to feast and deliberate public matters. They would pay a fee, like members of the National Arts Club, and they would be provided with food and drink. And although it's called a men's club, I have to say that the director was always a woman. That says something. My excavation at Sector A has yielded copious archaic material, but also earlier and later remains, including, you see in blue, a layer of the early Iron Age, the early first millennium BCE, which typically sits on bedrock, just the earliest layer. Then we have archaic structures that monumentalize the space to an extent. And then monumental terrace walls of the Roman imperial period. Here you see 3 parallel walls which supported the steep hill slope and also monumentalize the space. In doing so, in building these structures, the Roman builders cut into earlier layers, and especially the layer of the archaic and classical material, 6th to 4th centuries BCE, which is my focus tonight. This was especially rich in pottery and other clay finds, but also in animal bone. And this long terrace wall, which stands up to over 1.5 meters at its best preserved parts, was there to contain this layer, which was rich in finds, and also on its flat surface there were structures like this curvilinear structure you see here, which are indicative of activity. Here is another version from above. You see the different structures that date to the 6th century BCE. This is a hypothetical reconstruction of how the terrace wall would go. And it's important to keep in mind that at this point, the top of the Acropolis is very narrow. So extra space was essential if you really wanted to have some sort of intensive activity. The fill of the terrace was very rich in ceramics. And we have a lot of material. I've chosen to show you just a range of basins that were multifunctional vessels and were used in this space. The local repertory includes also a lot of cups and other vessels, but only a few storage vessels, but some of these carry figural decoration. You see sphinxes and other beasts on these swords. There are also figural decoration of humans. You see this example here. The head of this figure is about 7 meters high. So you can extrapolate that we are dealing with a figure which is some half a meter tall or so. So this is monumental art on clay vessel surfaces. The comparisons for this are found in a sanctuary nearby, but these are in bronze. But you can see how they love rendering the human figure, the curly hair in the front, this lock of hair on the side of the face. This is really a masterpiece of clay relief art. And people knew before we excavated that the site is famous for its storage vessel with a relief decoration, and we're collecting it, and finds from Lyktos can these days be found in museums across the northern hemisphere, basically from Tokyo to North America. Interestingly, the ancient tradition was revived in more recent times. When the Venice held Crete, traditional potters traced the same clay beds the ancient used and instigated a traditional pottery industry which survives to the present day and even exports vases around the world. The ancient deposits also held important material from Attica, especially from Athens, from Corinth, from Sparta and Laconia, from Ionia in modern Western Turkey, and most recently we identified the pieces from Cyprus, our first pieces from the Eastern Mediterranean. The range of Attic pottery is exceptional, and so its decoration. We have black and red figure vessels, white ground vessels, and black lost vessels, and you think, we only have little pieces, but the good thing is the trained eye can connect it to surviving examples. See, the little piece we have is part of the rim of a large bowl, so we do know specifically what they stand for. And here is another sample, more figures of gods, mortals, and other figures on these pieces. And some of it may be telling of activities taking place there. For example, this piece with music and dance, you see the double flute and the hand of a dancer, which we can reconstruct again from well-preserved examples found in museums around the world. Among the most impressive Attic finds are pieces of Panathenaic amphorae. These were amphorae given out in athletic competitions in the city of Athens. The trophy itself had a certain cultural value, but the content was olive oil from the sacred trees of Athena, and that was valuable, and that was sought after and sold around Greece and the Mediterranean. One of these pieces, that one, is ascribed to a specific painter known by his style and called the Achilles painter, and dates specifically to the third quarter of the 5th century BCE, more or less the time the Parthenon was being built. Such amphorae and other Attic pottery produced local imitations. Local potters experimented with decoration in the silhouette technique. And you see here a warrior and another figure who is holding something. Sometimes we like to amuse ourselves by saying, this looks like an anarchist holding a Molotov cocktail. But that's a product of the imagination. The truth is probably holding maybe a shoe. We have this type of iconography, somebody hitting someone else with a shoe. There are also graffiti and dipinti, which are otherwise rare in Crete. And remember what I told you, that was one of the pillars of exceptionalism. Painted and inscribed inscriptions, including one which gives us a list of commodities and quantities of these commodities. And it's important to have this sort of evidence because the Lyctian alphabet, the local alphabet, was previously known from inscriptions on stone, like those I showed, and also for something familiar to many of you, the inscriptions on bronze pieces of armor found at the Met and other museums in different parts of the world, which come not from Lyktos, but from a nearby site which was looted back in the 60s, and the finds were dispersed. The armor is inscribed as captured booty in the Lyctian alphabet, so we think it was the Lyctians who captured it. Back to Lyktos and the excavation of the Acropolis, we don't only have the pottery, but also a lot of figurines. We have dozens of them, human and animal figurines, clay protons, plaques with relief decoration, and flower-like objects. A terracotta plaque which shows the lower body of a female figure conforms to a type which is well known from different sites in the broader area and is taken to depict Athena, the goddess, holding a spindle whorl. This iconography and the Panathenaic amphoras, which I showed earlier, bring to mind a Hellenistic inscription from Lyktos, which report that Athena was the Poliad deity of the site. And this has been taken to suggest that Athena was worshipped at the site. A cult of Athena on the Acropolis of Lyktos, where we are excavating, would explain our copious finds of spindle whorls and loom weights, which are found in sanctuaries of female deities, in addition to domestic contexts around Greece. We also have some special finds which hit to Athena, and these are the two pieces on the left, which show an owl, as you can see from different examples. And the owl was the sacred bird of Athena in Greek mythology. So other finds from Sector A also point to this possibility of a sanctuary, like bronze pieces, a bone which was carved into the head of a bug, and other things that get us really excited. There is also a piece of a clay fire dog, which served the roasting of meat skewers, predecessors of souvlaki, Greek souvlaki. This goes hand in hand with our recovery of impressive quantities of animal bone in the same layer, a considerable percentage of which presents cut marks. These bones belong to the usual domestic species, but there is a relatively large percentage of pig, including wild boar. And this brought to my mind the rendering of the boar on the coins of Lyktos, an iconography which they kept for centuries, obviously because they enjoyed hunting wild boar. These finds and the high number of Attic fine ware, which is a rare pottery class for archaic and classical Crete, as well as the underrepresentation of coarse ware at the site, differentiate the deposit we are excavating from ordinary settlement debris and are indicative of supra-household level commensality. It is tempting, even if tentative at this stage, to associate these finds with a sanctuary, perhaps the sanctuary of Athena mentioned in that Hellenistic inscription I mentioned. How should we picture it? A sanctuary of Athena on the Cretan city of Gortyn gives you an idea. The temple at the very top, where our excavation has not reached, and then on a steep slope, you have votive deposits, very rich in clay finds, and terrace walls, like the one we're excavating. The archaic finds from a probable sanctuary on the Acropolis of Lyktos find their chronological counterparts in the burial finds from Sector D, which lies some 800 meters west of the Acropolis. In this area, we have been excavating a cemetery dating from the mid-7th to the transition to the 5th century BCE. Our work is conducted in collaboration with physical anthropologists and includes the application of a range of analytical techniques from geo and bioarchaeology. We chose to excavate this site after examining the limited material collected from burials destroyed during the opening of the road you see crossing the site in 1986. We know that this was not the only archaic burial site around Lyktos, since this fabulous gold pendant is said to originate from a site southeast of the Acropolis. Sector D, where we are excavating, is a cemetery which is primarily used for cremation and shows a remarkable concentration of burial containers, and especially medium-sized storage vessels and sarcophagi. The sarcophagi are especially located in the west part of the site. There are also burial structures. You can see one on top, which is rectangular. But most of our finds are these storage vessels, which typically have their mouth sealed by clay discs. In one case, one of these discs was a broken potter's wheel. Rough stones, some of which of a right color and quality, surrounded the neck of some of the storage vessels, or, more rarely, the whole body of the containers. Most burial containers were furnished with perfume bottles, cups, bowls, and juglets. Some of the small vessels are imports from Corinth and Attica and show figural decoration. Over there you see a panther. Metal finds are less common, and other finds are basically uncommon, but include a bone piece with different holes, preserving a golden peg. From talking to experts, I've understood that this combination of materials is very rare for the Aegean. However, both this combination and the form of the piece with these many holes bring to mind game boards from the Near East, like this piece from Megiddo, illustrated here, which is earlier, and it's gold and ivory. There is no time, of course, to discuss the different burials, but I single out a few ones which provide rich information. Burial 2, over here, involved a pithos with the protum of a female figure holding a round object or a fruit. This kind of anthropomorphism of a container is highly exceptional for Greek storage vessels used as burials. And so is the use of a Cretan pithos with any sort of figural decoration for burial purposes. Notice the bluish stone underlying the neck of the pithos and the imported jug from Corinth with the elegant double handle below the pithos neck. Another burial, number 8, was exposed after the removal of this layer of broken pottery. Inside this burial container were a silver bead and 8 well-preserved small vessels, including a piriform maribalus from Corinth, 6 Corinthian alabastra, and a cylindrical pyxis with an accompanying lid. 3 more Corinthian alabastra were found underneath the pithos, just below. Such a concentration of Corinthian pottery in a burial context is unique for Crete and exceptional for much of the Aegean. Burial 7, and you see the different phases of it, held a different surprise. The pithos had a lid closing its mouth, but contained no offerings. Yet, after we lifted the large container, underneath its neck, we found a group of 6 small vessels that had been deposited there. Miniature vessels are normally associated with child burials, but this is difficult to say in our case since the bones are poorly attested at the site, despite our extensive efforts to recover even the slightest pieces. And I will return to this in a moment. Beside artifacts, we recovered ecofacts through a variety of fieldwork methodologies and archaeological scientific techniques. This slide shows you the results of anthracological analysis, which established that olive and oak wood was mostly used for the cremations practiced at the site. In 2024, we had our first evidence for inhumation. So we have plenty of cremations, but our first evidence for inhumation has become clear, and this enriches the picture considerably. The inhumations are dug into pits, put into pits dug into bedrock. We excavate all these burials in micro layers of 2 to 3 centimeters thickness using small spatulas and dental picks. 100% of the soil contents of all burial containers is processed through what we call flotation. All soil surrounding the container is dry sieved. And yet, despite these efforts, we encountered very few and very small pieces of typically calcined and carbonized bone, especially cranial and long bone. Traditionally, empty or near-empty burials are interpreted as cenotaphs, but recent studies have highlighted the frequency and complexity of related burial depositions in Eurasian prehistory and beyond, and have invited for more nuanced interpretations. Accordingly, we have developed a set of hypotheses for these burials, some of which we have discarded since we first developed them, but it's interesting to reflect on the range of interpretative possibilities. A soil sample we took from the site, which was tested with digital pH-meter, established that this is an acidic environment which can dissolve bone. However, this does not fully account for the paucity of hard bone and teeth. Acid soil is not enough to consume this entirely. So the possibility of a burial custom involving initial deposition of cremated bone in storage vessel and later the breaking of the body of the vessel and the exhumation and curation of the bone could explain why the burial containers were encountered are always broken on their top layer, regardless of the depth we encounter them, and otherwise remain in situ. This possibility finds support in stratigraphic observation. Look, for example, how a stony layer above burial 10 is interrupted right above the remains of the sarcophagus, as if someone dug a pit not broad enough to enter the container, but broad enough for them to access the interior of the sarcophagus. Most recently, discoveries from 2024 have enriched our understanding. In 2024, we found this rectangular structure you see there, and this yielded a considerable amount of bone, more than 100 small pieces. And the structure had an interesting history. Below one of its walls, a beautiful Corinthian vessel had been entered as some sort of foundation deposit before the stones were laid. Inside, we find other pottery which suggests that the structure was in use in the late 7th and 6th century. But despite the abundance of the bone, this cannot be the final resting place of the majority of the bones from the cemetery. So the puzzle is still with us. Another discovery, however, taught us a big lesson. This small pot found near the structure was full of cremated bone. So although the soil is acidic and can't dissolve bone, the bone can also remain in quantity. So what is these finds confirm our suspicion that it's not only geogenic processes that remove the bone, but also anthropogenic ones. So currently the most appealing hypothesis we are investigating is that we once had full-bodied burials from which the bone was removed as part of some sort of secondary funerary ritual. And it's interesting that the ancient Lyktos had a specific guild of people engaged with cremation. This is something we do not know from anywhere else in the Greek world and perhaps also in the Roman world. We have a story which explains how this special guild came to be formed at some time in a distant mythical past, but clearly Plutarch, an author of the Roman period, still knew of it. So it must mean something for the local practice of cremation. We are still working, however, on developing the most compelling interpretation, and for this we're using a range of theoretical perspectives on fragmentation, on personhood and ontology, and also a set of applications of archaeological science in collaboration with labs in New York City and elsewhere in the world. And of course, we pay a lot of attention to stratigraphy and contextual analysis. So sometime in the future, I hope to tell you, to have solved the puzzle for you and reported. This brings me to my conclusion. Based on the new discoveries at Lyktos and elsewhere, I argue that the Cretan Archaic Gap is not a genuine historical phenomenon that calls for a historical interpretation, but the product of the history of our discipline. The changes in the material record of the island at around 600 BCE, and especially the development of less diagnostic artifact styles, present genuine challenges. However, the problem of the Archaic Gap and the associated notion of Cretan exceptionalism was often shaped by the lack of scholarly interest in Crete after the Minoan period, and of this associated oversight of important sites and finds, and of course, the lack of problem-oriented archaeological research. To compensate for these problems, I propose a two-pronged approach. First, we go back and study legacy material and make the most of it, but also that we develop new and problem-oriented and solution-oriented fieldwork and finds research. This is the most effective way to put to test the crisis narratives that were popular with scholars of the past, to generate a new understanding of 6th century Crete beyond the tropes of the local exceptionalism, and to draw broader conclusions on the visibility and invisibility of aspects of the archaeological record in ancient Greece and beyond. In closing this lecture, I must highlight that in presenting to you tonight, I'm representing the work of a large team, including members who are here with us tonight. These are dedicated and high-spirited colleagues and students from NYU and across the world, and also we rely on the support of the local communities and we love to partner with them. We rely on them, and we plan outreach activities for them. We also have a large community online. with a Facebook and an Instagram account of over 10,000 people, which probably makes us the most popular account on Instagram for any project on Greek archaeology. I also know that if you go to Crete this summer, you'll find some of our finds in a temporary exhibition at the Archaeological Museum of Heraklion, and there is also an associated documentary. We had a crew on the site, and I'll have a surprise for the end on this note. But I must say that so much of what we do would have been impossible without the generous support of institutions in Greece and the USA, and also from Greek and American individuals. I thank them profusely for their support, and I thank you all for your attention. Thank you. If you don't mind, I show a teaser from that documentary that was shot for the site with some Cretan music and pictures from the excavation.
And just a little note, right after, we'll be going into Q&A. Please feel free.
Thank you.
I gotta. Okay.
Hang on, we have to.
Alright. Okay. Something?